Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Second Samuel, and today we are doing chapter 8, starting from verse 1. Now, we have looked at chapter 7 in great detail, and one of the interesting way that the Hebrew language references itself is this word noun. And if you are familiar with the Hebrew, you find that this is really the conjunction and. And it is in what we call a vowel consecutive. So it is actually a narrative that continues from chapter 7, but we don't know how long has passed because the text within the word itself doesn't say, but we know that it happens after whatever chapter 7 has taken place. So I like this word, and then it happened. This thing took place, right? This took place afterward, after chapter 7, that David himself, he actually led, if you notice, in the ancient days, the kings lead the army to war. And in this case, David came, he defeated the Philistines. And the word defeated here uh, literally calls to, I don't know, what do you call this? Um, Calls to subjugate, right? Cause to destroy. So the word defeat is a modern English word, but literally, David caused to destroy the Philistines and he subdued them. And this is a good word, subdue. But in actual fact, the word itself means uh, to cause to humble, right? To cause to humble. To cause the Philistines to humble. And so subdue them so that they are no longer uh, going to fight David. So they are the vanquished. They lost the battle. This is what the word actually tells us. And so David took hold control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. Now, the chief city is really means the main city. The main city, as you know, the Philistines had a number of cities, and it is said that this would be Gath. If you recall, there was his friend Achish. But the idea here, there were a number of cities that the Philistines had, and David went to take control or take the chief city from the hand of the Philistine. Uh, this word take is literally take control, to take over the chief city, the main city of the Philistines. And it's believed as Gath, right? Believed as Gath. In verse 2, we find that David continued to defeat or to strike at Moab. And then somehow it says that he made them lie down on the ground and measured with a line, a cord. In our concept today, this would be a measuring stick, right? A measuring tape. They made them lie down on the ground, and he measured two lines to put to death, a full line to keep alive. It means that 2/3 die and 1/3 live. That's basically what he did. Now, some say that this has to do with First Samuel chapter 22, when David was running away from Saul and had sent his parents and his brothers there. Now, we don't read of whatever happened to them thereafter. It was assumed, I guess, Jewish tradition had it that they were killed. And so this appears that it's David also seeking vengeance for the lives of their parents. The Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. And this is what we need to pay attention to. The idea of tribute in verse 2. Tribute means a gift, right? A gift. Tribute also means, well, I guess, a present. And this is actually to bestow on David. It is to note that David is the king over all, and Moab is now a subject of the Israelite kingdom that David is ruling. Well, in those days, you find that David does not conquer Moab to annex the land. David conquered Moab to put them into subjection. I guess you could think of it very much like how should we like in the good old days, like the Siamese kingdom, and he took the Malay states of Peninsular Malaya, and they had to give a bunga mas, a gold flower, to present to the king. And this is what it means to pay tribute, so that the powerful nation who actually came to conquer them is happy and would not do any other adverse things to this nation who has been vanquished. Verse 3, David moved up north. Oh, he moved up north to defeat this king, right? This king is Hadad Edzer. Hadad Edzer is the son of Rehov, the king of Zovar. And then he went, now this is he, and this is David. He went to, I wouldn't say it's restore. He went to extend, right? The word restore here, although it has a concept of bring back, but David never had it, so it's not an idea of restore. The word here is shuv, right? It's shuv, but it's in the hifril. It is to cause to expand. I think that would be a good way of saying it. So let's put it down. This word restore is to expand or to extend. It is not to restore. And this is David's power to the river. Now, to the river, this river is Paratz, right? Paratz is the river. And the word Paratz means it's a bursting forth. How God's anger burst forth at the person who touched the Ark of the Covenant. So it's the same word, Paratz. And so usually this word in association to a river literally refers to the Euphrates River, because it is just bursting forth. And that's the kind of river that denotes the Euphrates. In verse 4, we find that David now captures the Hadad Edzer, that's him, right? Captured him. And you find that he had 1,700 horsemen, 20,000 foot soldiers. And David captured all this and took over all the chariot horses, but left enough of them for 100 chariots. Now, this hamstrung is really to get rid of them. And we're made to understand with regards to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16, that a king is not supposed to multiply horses. And so whenever you see horses or chariots, you find every chariot has about 4 horses. And so there are many horses here. And so David decided to leave some of the horses behind. Now, when the Aramean of Damascus, understand the Aramean of Damascus are the Syrians. They must have a pact. Came to the help of Hadad-Edzer, and this is king of Hadad-Edzer, king of Zobah. David killed 22,000 men among the Arameans and thereby subjugated them, right? Subjugated them. We come to verse 6. Then David put garrisons, and this word garrisons is governors. People who would report back to David among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute, presents, gifts. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. Now, this word helped in verse 6 is Yashar. This really gives us an idea. This word help is to deliver. It is also, I would say, to give victory. And so in a state of difficulty, there is a concept of deliver. In a concept of fighting to win, the same word has a concept of victory. And so wherever David went, he was victorious. And this is attributed to God, right? It's attributed to God. So now we find in verse 7, David took the shields of gold, which were carried by the servants of Hadad-Edzer, and brought them to Jerusalem. So we're talking about gold here. In verse 8, we find that David continued this escapade all around the nation of Israel. Notice, he is actually going out to make sure that his neighbors are all friendly with him. And so we find here from Betak, and then this is Berotai, the cities of Hadad-Edzer. This is the northern part of Israel, took very large amount of bronze. So now he's got both gold and bronze. Verse 9, this is what it says: when Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the whole army of Hadad-Edzer, Toi sent his son Joram to King David to greet him and bless him. And so it says here, to greet him means to, I guess you could say, to ask for shalom, right? Ask for shalom. And now we have the second one is to bless. So Joram goes to King David to ask for shalom and to bless him, because he had fought Hadad-Edzer, defeated him. For Hadad-Edzer had been at war with Toi. And Joram brought with him articles of gold, silver, and bronze, and these are gifts. Now you're beginning to see that the expansion of the kingdom of David is moving towards the broadest and the widest. With Hadad-Edzer, we're talking about north of Israel. And the further north you go, you find that it will come to the land towards Haran beyond the Euphrates. So David is pushing his boundaries north towards the Euphrates, basically. And he has moved eastward to Moab and to Syria. And that's the territories around David. And he went east to against the Amalekites and to the Philistines, right? The Amalekites in the south. And so what we have found is that by this time in verse 10, he has already subjugated. I use the word subjugated to show that David had conquered them and they are now wanting to be at peace with David. And for the return of peace, they send articles of gold, silver, and bronze to give to David so that there is a sense of magnanimity to grant peace to all the nations around David, and so there will be peace. Verse 11, David also consecrated. Now, the idea of consecrated here is to make holy, right? Set apart. And place them to God with the silver, the gold that he had set apart from all the nations which he had subdued. The word subdue here gives us the idea that he has brought into subjection. That these nations are now a subject of the nation of Israel. And so the idea of consecration now is David is now taking all of these and he dedicates them, he sets them apart. So whenever we talk about making holy, understand that the word holy is about setting apart and making it special. It is not meant for general purpose, but to be used for God. And these are things that came from Aram, which is Syria, Moab, which is east of Israel and south of their land, the sons of Ammon, the Ammonites, the Philistines on the east of them, the Amalek from the south of them, the spoils of Hadad Ezer, the north of them. You see, all around Israel, every nation around David has been made into subjection, and they willingly provide a tribute in exchange for peace. By this time that we would understand when the text says, and now, so means and then, David made a name when he returned from killing 18,000 Arameans in the Valley of Salt. You notice the Valley of Salt was referred to in Genesis chapter 13, right? 13 and 14. Maybe 14 when they were fighting the kings of the north. Now, the whole idea here is made a name. Made a name is literally, how should we say, he has become accomplished. And the name here is about himself. That everyone now knows David. Not only that, they fear David. And so the kingdom here is in its greatest glory, according to Jewish traditions. And so the name that God promised him, that I will make you a great name. And yes, through all the conquests, God was with him and gave him victory over all the nations around him. And so indirectly, you could say that behind all this, God helped make him a name. And so in this case, although the narrative says David made a name for himself, but from the background, we see that it was God moving, right? God moving there. He also put garrisons in Edom. Garrisons are governors. In Edom, which is the southeast. And in all Edom, he put the governors, and all Edomites became servants to David. And the Lord helped David wherever he went. Now, again, this word help is to give victory. It's another repeat that though they never fought the Edomites willingly subject themselves to David. In verse 15, known as a summary, the summary is, so again, we find that after all these said and done, and then David reigned over all Israel. Now, all Israel is called Israel, and these are now, in this context, 12 tribes. Not just the northern, but all 12 tribes. And David had administered justice and righteousness for all his people. And so we need to break this down. What is justice? The word justice here is mishpat. And this one would be justice with regards to judgments, especially of cases, to be fair, and of course, just. That's where we get the word justice. It is to be fair and just, right? To be fair and just. And the second part here is, it says here, righteousness. Now, typically, you find that this word is used as righteousness means, I would like to use charity. Good deeds, charity. This is about taking care of the poor, the needy, the weak, the orphan, the widows. This is what it means. He takes care of all his people. He gave them justice, which reflects who God is. And so whenever there is justice, and the poor, the weak, the needy, the fatherless, and those without husbands are all taken care of, then the work of David as king is done correctly. In verse 16, now we begin to see another narrative. Now, the narrative here, I guess you find that there is a missing word here, which is and, or and then. You find that Joab, the son of Zeruiah, this was the troublemaker, right? Who sought his vengeance, but David had gave him a pass, and Joab himself became the commander over the army, because in 2 Samuel chapter 5, we read in the parallel passage in First Chronicles that David gave the right of governor or of commander to the one who was able to climb up the shaft, get into the Jebusite stronghold, conquer the city, and deal with it. And we're told in First Chronicles that that person was Joab. And so he was the commander of the army. And Jehoshaphat, the son of Eliud, was the secretary. Now, there is no secretary in Hebrew. And so this is the scribe, the one who writes. After we talked about the commander of the army, we have the scribe who's going to write for David. We have Zadok, the son of Ahitub. Remember, he was killed earlier on. and Ahimelech, the son of Aviatar, they were the priests, the Kohen. And so, and this name here, Seraiah, he was a scribe, right? He was a scribe. The previous one was the scribe, or what we call the recorder, right? The recorder. So verse 16 was the recorder. Verse 17 is the scribe. In verse 18, we talk about Benaiah. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, he was placed over these two. Now, these two are interesting names. In verse 18, it's not a character, right? It's not a character. You find that these are the archers. And these are the slingers. All right. And David's sons were the chief ministers or officers. And we get the idea here is we have Joab with the army, and then we have Benaiah right here in verse 18, and he will be responsible for those who would stand behind the army. These are not the fighting men, these are the instrument men, the ones who will shoot the bow and arrow, and those who would sling the stone. And then David's sons became the chief ministers of the nation. Now, what we have read in chapter 8 is a very interesting, I would say, a shift in the narrative, because we've been always looking at David doing this, David doing that. And finally, we talk about David's escapade, and God was with him to silence all the nations around them. And therefore, they now can live in peace and be given tribute by all these nations around them. So they can see that Israel became the big brother to all the nations around her. And with that, everything was put in place, and David was good to go and reign in supreme power and authority. Now, with this, we come to the end of our session today.